Hi, and welcome back to the Friendly Fox. The season is upon us, and we are off to a party this weekend, and one of my daughters asked me to make a dress. So this is the dress she wants. It's a Vogue pattern, but she wants the sleeves of this dress. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out this morning. Let's get busy. The selvage on this fabric is grabbing and making it buckle. So I'm just going to take the selvage off before I start cutting so I can get a nice lay flat pattern piece on here, and I don't have to worry about it buckling the piece I'm trying to cut. This fabric also has a nap, so I have to be careful that all the pieces are going with the nap. Because this pattern piece is so big, I actually have to cut two separately because they won't fit on the fabric if it's folded. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut two separately. For this, I've got the nap going the way I want it to be, and I've got the green line going the way I want it to be. Very seldom use pins, but today I'm going to use pins. This pattern piece and this fabric will walk away from me if I don't have it pinned properly. Some people do this with soup cans. You can just put weighted cans on your fabric and hold it in place. Now that's one of the skirt back cut. And now keeping the nap and the green line and everything the same, I'm going to go ahead and cut a second one. I don't have to repin because this is going to stick. Okay, now those are the two skirt backs cut. I'm going to cut the skirt front. I usually cut in my sewing room, but this pattern was so big, and I knew I was going to have a problem with that skirt and having to cut it not on the fold. So I decided to bring it out to this bigger table, which is actually a dining room table. If you are working on a pattern that's bigger than your space, you can cut it and then just kind of pull it down and do the next piece and pull it down and do the next piece. Or you can find a bigger table or sit on the floor, or there's lots of ways to pet that cat. This is a sleeve I'm doing now. Again, I made sure I was with the nap. Okay, and that's both of my sleeves cut. Now I'm going to cut out the bodice, remembering to work with the grain. This is the bodice back. If you're already familiar with sewing with patterns, you probably already know this, but if you're not familiar with sewing with patterns, the pattern piece not only tells you what grain you need to go with, and if there's a nap, you need to follow that directional fabric, but it also will tell you right on the pattern piece how many to cut. I need to cut 4 of this. So I'm just going to lay it back on here again and cut 2 more. Again, making sure I'm staying with the nap of the fabric, which sometimes will eat, well, practically always eats up more fabric because you're not able to cut things upside down and sort of fit them together as tight as you can because you're thinking about the nap or the direction of the fabric. Okay, that's 4 pieces of the bodice back. This is the front of the dress, and I'm going to have to cut 2 of these on the fold. Where it's got that little thing there, that's to cut it on the fold. Again, remembering to go with the right lay of the velvet. As you know, I don't use pins very often. This snap bracelet that I wear when I am pinning just wraps around your wrist, and it's so handy to have. And this is a magnet for the pins. So whether you're taking the pins out or putting them on, they just snap right onto the magnet, and it's great. Okay, that's one. And I need a second one. This dress has a really pretty bow in the back. So it's just this big long piece here. And we're going to cut 2. This pattern calls for darts. And so I learned this trick years ago. You put a pin in at the top of the dart, right through the paper pattern, and you put a pin at the start of the dart right here, and a pin at the start of the dart on the other side. And then when you take this pattern off, you have an exact location of where the the dart's going to go. And then you can even open it up and mark the opposite side of the dart there, and the top of the dart right there. So now you know on both pieces that it's this wide and ends at that point, this wide and ends at that point. Good trick, huh? I'm getting ready to stitch in the dart. So there's my pin right there as my starting point. Here are my 2 pins as my ending point. And as long as it's all lined up, the dart will be right where it's supposed to be. So this is the bodice front, and that's the 2 darts for the bust. You're going to do 4 of these because you've got the front piece that shows to the front of the dress, and then the lining piece that's on the inside. You should never back stitch at the top of a dart just because you want it to look really crisp. So you just come down to the bottom. You can back stitch at the bottom of a dart, but you absolutely tie the threads at the top of a dart. So I've tied my knots, trimming the threads. Darts are always pressed to the center front. These darts will come in this way. So they're pressed in towards the center. And then when you pick that up as the seam, the dart will just lie nice and flat. This fabric is quite stretchy. And so in order to give it some integrity, you have to use an interfacing. For this one, the pattern called for a non-fusible. There are 2 different types of interfacing. One is an iron-on and it'll hold with pressing, and the other one is stitch-in. And this is a stitch-in. So I won't be pressing this to hold it into place. So I'm going to stitch all the way from here up, around, all the way around, and down to this corner here. The interfacing goes to the wrong side of the fabric, not the pretty side. I'm using the clips right now because this fabric is so stretchy. This pattern calls for a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, but because I'm basting this interfacing, I'm going to go inside the 5/8 just so that the stitching won't show when I actually construct the dress. I would never buy a pattern if it wasn't on a real person because they show them with those snatched waists and you think, oh, this is fabulous. And then when you construct it, it's like garbage. So that's going to give the fabric some structural integrity so it doesn't try to get too floppy. Okay, now this is the back bodice piece, the lining to it. And again, I've pinned the piece on there to the wrong side. And I'm going to go all the way around and finish here. So there's the interfacing attached, and there's the interfacing attached to the 2 back pieces. Now we're going to stitch these side seams right here with right sides together. We're just doing the side seams. We're not doing the top here. In order to make sure that this stitching is covered now, we're going to use a 5/8 inch seam allowance so that when it gets turned inside out, you won't see this stitching. Most patterns are done with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and it's important to get the right fit that you take the 5/8 inch. So now when I turn that inside out, you won't see any of that line that was right there, this line. If you're going to do it on a serger, it's still important that you use the 5/8. Just this part would be cut off by the serger. Now I'm going to do the other side. When you use a regular sewing machine, it's really important that you always press your seams wide open. So don't press them this way or this way, press them open. Okay, starting to come together. There's the front of the dress and the part that will come up the back and be the shoulder. Okay, so this pattern, as you know, I've shown you, has a big bow on the back. This fabric is a little too floppy to hold the structure of that bow. So I'm going against Vogue's pattern instructions, and instead of just cutting 2 pieces to create this bow, I've cut 4. And I'm going to put some interfacing in it. And I'm going to use fusible because I need the structure to be attached right to the interfacing to give it that integrity I'm looking for. So I don't normally use fusible when I've got a stretch fabric, but here we go. Fusible has a shiny side to it and a dull side. And you can feel little knobs on this side, and that's the part that you want to attach face down on your fabric. So using the cloth and no steam, because if you use steam, you'll just mess it all up. Now I've got this anchored in place. I'm going to turn it over and lay this up. And with right sides together, the velvet sticks well to each the sides. So now I'm going to take this to the machine and I'm going to go all the way around the three long sides. Now using the 5/8 seam allowance, I'm going to go all the way around. And now I'll do the second one. I'm going to take this back over to the ironing board and I'm going to trim here. I'm going to trim here, and then I'm going to turn it inside out and press it. So now after you've turned it inside out and you've pulled the corners as precise as you can, here's a trick I use when I'm pressing out these corners. Roll it and that'll get it right on the seam. You just use your fingers and roll them, and then to get them really tight, put the iron on and then lift it as you're pressing, and that sort of pushes the fabric out to the sides as you're pressing it. You use a little bit of pressure to do it, and that just makes all the fabric sort of spread out so that you get a nice edge on your pressing. Now that I've turned this inside out, I'm going to gather the ends so that when it attaches to the bodice, there's a little bit of a gather. So here's the bodice front. Here's the darts we did. Here's the bodice front, the side seam, and this is the part that will come back over the shoulder and create the back. So this is where this will be placed. Make sure you get the pointed end the way you want it. So for me, I want it up. So I'm going to pin this right here. On the pattern piece, this is the bodice back. On the pattern piece, there are 2 dots here that indicate where the tie is supposed to be fastened on the pattern piece. So I didn't want to mark it because it's a kind of a nice dress. So I measured down. It's 2.5 inches. So 2.5 inches is the top of where this is going to be placed. And then I'll do the other side as well. And then you're just going to hold it there while we do the lining to the back. Before I put the bodice lining on and attach the ties, remember my daughter asked for sleeves to be put on this dress because it's going to be cold. So I took the sleeve from another Vogue pattern and cut it out. And now I'm going to put it into this dress. There's the sleeve. And there's a couple of different ways to do this sleeve. I'm not a particular fan of inserting the sleeve this way, but because of the bodice lining that has to go into this dress, I'm going to go ahead and do it. So I'm going to close this seam here now and then insert it into the dress. Now while I have this sleeve closed, I'm going to mark the halfway point right here. Now I'm going to go and press this open, but I also need to close this seam where the 2 shoulders meet so that when it comes back, I'll have an armhole there. Here's my sleeve. Be careful that that pin marking the center on the shoulder doesn't stab me, and I'm going to turn this inside out, and using this underarm seam of the sleeve, I'm going to fasten it to the underarm seam with right sides together of the dress. And I'm going to clip that right there, and I'm going to take that pin on the top side and fasten it right to the top shoulder seam between the front and the back of the dress. And now I know that between here and here, going all the way around, as long as I get it matching at the top and the bottom, this sleeve will fit. I'm going to go sew it in now. Before I attach this sleeve, it didn't quite match up. When I did the insert, it didn't quite match up. So I'm going to put a little bit of gather here so that I can ease the sleeve into the shoulder of the dress. You might have to do this occasionally. Sometimes you don't. It's because I'm using a pattern, two different patterns and combining them. So I'm going to put a little bit of a gather in the top of this sleeve. Now, with the bottom underarm seams matched, right sides together, I'm going to go ahead and sew this sleeve into this dress. 5/8 inch seam allowance all the way around. Don't forget the pin is going to match to the shoulder. Keeping these seams open, even though you've pressed them, sometimes they will try to twist closed like that one. And it just creates bulk when you're wearing the dress. It's very minor, but it's just something that's not very comfortable. And so I always try to, even though the seam is pressed open, always make sure that that's laying flat when you're doing the seam. So here's the sleeve that I just put in. Here's the bodice of the dress. Here's the other sleeve that I just put in. Here's the back of the dress. So this is the part that's going to be touching your skin, and clearly that's not what you want. So this dress has a bodice lining of the same fabric. So now I'm going to create the lining for this dress by taking this bodice top that's going to actually be the lining. This part will actually be against your skin, and these are the other pieces that get attached that go around to the back of the lining. So now I'm going to do the side seams and the shoulder seams so that I can then use that as the lining for the dress. Now I'm going to press these seams open that I've just created, press them open, and then we're going to use clips to attach this to the bodice top. Here's the bodice lining that I just made, and this is the actual top with the sleeves already inserted. Going to right sides together, match the shoulders. Okay, let's get back in the sewing machine. Now this part's a bit finicky. This is where the tie is. When you're stitching the dress front to the bodice front, make sure you've got the tie going the right way in the fold of what we're doing here. We just came across the neckline. Now we're at the other tie, and so just know as you're coming through this here that it's going to get a little bit thick and difficult to deal with. What we just did was stitch the back up over the shoulder, the front neckline, and all the way to the center back on the other side. So now I'm going to clip the corners, clip the curves, and turn it inside out so you can see what it's going to look like. That's the front, one sleeve, the other sleeve, the tie, and the tie. So I'll press it so it's all going to lie nice now. Sometimes when you're making patterns, you don't even really, like, you can see the finished product, but you're following the instructions blindly, just hoping, because sometimes you're doing the pattern and you go, I don't see how this is going to work. And then lo and behold, it all comes together. Now the top is finished and on hold, and I'm going to put the skirt together. So I'm going to sew the center back on the two back pieces, and I'm going to sew the side seams so that the backs are attached to the front. So that was the center back I just did, and now I'm doing a side seam. So that's the back seam done, one side seam, and now I'm going to do the other side seam. It's going to have that swing, you know. Pressing all the seams open. It's really important to press all your seams open when you're sewing. It just makes your finished product look more professional. So now there's the skirt, and I'm going to go ahead and fasten it onto the top. Now I've got the skirt ready, and I've taken the top off of the mannequin. So with right sides together on the finished product, I'm going to start at the center back here. I'm not pinning in the lining because the lining will actually be turned over the seam to encase it. So I'm just taking the bodice top, pinning it to the skirt, and I'm going to go all the way around here. Match the side seam to the side seam. So there's the side seam of the bodice top, and there's the side seam of the skirt. So I'm going to match those, and any fitting I have to do in between these 2 points, I can feather it in so that it fits nicely. I'm going to continue all the way around here, pinning the front of the top to the front of the top of the skirt, just making sure I'm matched all the way around. Again, match the side seam and feather in anywhere you have to so that it's matched, and all the way around to the back. So now this is putting the top to the skirt. Again, make sure you don't have the lining in it. It's just the top of the skirt to the top of the dress, the bodice. And here we are with the perfect holiday dress. Of course, the choice of fabric that I've made here has made it a holiday dress, but you could use it in other colors for other events. The back of the dress is the showpiece. Very, very pretty on the back here with this big bow. I used pattern V1102, and of course, you know that I didn't like the lack of sleeve, so I used the pattern V1981 to create this sleeve and attach it into the dress. This pattern is a very tight sleeve, and I didn't really like it once I got it put in, so I took it out and I created this bell sleeve. The amount of work that's involved in this, I would recommend it for an intermediate sewer. There's a few things that you have to be familiar with sewing techniques to go ahead and make this dress. So all in all, I really enjoyed making it, and I hope you will too. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below, and I'll see you next time.